welcome to the Super Awesome You. Coming to you on the Super Awesome Mix Podcast Network, I'm your host, Samra Obiselby, and each week we'll be exploring the topic of motivation, and of course, add one song to the motivational mixtape we're working on week after week. You'll find links in the show notes for the playlist, and you can also follow us at Super Awesome Mix for more of our shows and content. If you also have a minute, please leave a 5-star review that helps expand the show's reach and bring even more super awesomeness into the world. This week we'll be covering the topic, the 20-second rule. This was brought up in a book called The Happiness Advantage that I read many years ago, and if you haven't read it, I highly recommend picking it up and taking a look. It's a book that I actually do read cover to cover because it's really heavily based on a lot of research and scientific evidence for kind of having a positive mindset and viewing the world, as an opportunity instead of something that kind of crushes you. If you've heard of the growth mindset, it kind of talks a lot about that. But what's different than just, your typical self-help book is that, again, is based on a lot of research and brings in a lot of science-based evidence on why these things work. And so absolutely love that element. And of course, it, makes a lot of sense in this podcast where I try to talk a lot about the science of motivation. So the 20-second rule is this idea that things and habits that we try to do, we should make them 20 seconds easier. And things that we don't want to do, we should make them 20 seconds harder. The author brings up an example when he's talking about this, and he himself was trying to learn the guitar. And he realized that if he made the guitar 20 seconds easier, meaning that he would have to spend less, time to play the guitar, like it's 20 seconds within reach of time spent, he'd be more likely to do it. So in his scenario, I believe he talks about coming home after a long day of work, sits on the couch, grabs a remote because that's the easiest path. And as we talked about in episode 1, our brains tend to want to do the easiest path because we're always trying to conserve energy. And hours go by, there you go, his night's gone, he hasn't practiced the guitar. So he had this idea of making guitar 20 seconds easier because I'm sure he wanted to play the guitar, but if you are like him and you're like me and you're like most people, you sit on the couch and inertia takes over, right? So inertia is this idea that bodies at rest tend to stay at rest, and we don't really want to get up to the closet where his guitar was and walk all the way across the room and pick up the guitar and bring it back and walk again across, a different part of the room and get the sheet music. This seems like an insurmountable amount of work when you are already comfortably seated on the couch and the remote is right there within reach. So he flipped the script, right? So the guitar now, he set the stand up right by the couch along with the sheet music and everything he needed to practice. And he literally put the remote, I believe, if I remember correctly, and this has been many years since I've read it, he put the remote in his bedroom. I think he may have even put the batteries to the remote in a different part of his house as well, or his apartment. So if he wanted to watch television, he would have to go, all the way to his bedroom, pick up the remote, go to a different place, get the batteries, put the batteries in the remote, walk all the way back to the couch and watch television. So he made it 20 seconds harder because he'd have to spend an additional 20 seconds to do all of that work in order to sit and watch television. I really like this because what it's doing is it's not saying don't watch television. It's not banning him from watching it. It's just making it a little bit harder to watch it. And essentially what it's doing is raising the activation energy required for you to do that task. So activation energy is this principle, another principle in physics, which is that for certain chemical reactions to take place, you need to put in at front more energy than really what will then be required afterwards, like where it stabilizes, after this kind of like shot of energy that goes through. I'll give you an example that we probably interact with every single day, which is like the engine of a gas car. When you turn on that engine, you'll notice that like the RPM meter spikes. The engine goes all the way up to like 800, 900 RPM. And then once it's done turning on, it comes back to an idle anywhere from 200 to 400 RPM, depending on the engine. It's not staying at that peak point much longer than the beginning. But the starting of a car requires a lot of energy. You have to turn on a lot of systems. You've got to pull in a lot of power. You have to kick start the battery basically going and the chemical reaction of the battery and all the engine and the gas burning, et cetera, et cetera. That requires a lot of activation energy. And so what you're doing whenever you are, trying to make something easier is you're lowering that peak. You're basically making that peak a little bit more of, a small hill, let's say, because now your brain sits down at the couch and looks around it and it's like, cool, television I could watch, activation energy is really high for that because I got to go and build my remote back and bring it back here. Or you know what? I actually do want to play the guitar and it's sitting right here in front of me. Let me grab the guitar and start to play. I've been using this in my own life recently because, as I may have mentioned on a previous episode, I'm currently training for a marathon that I hope to run by the end of this year. No, I will run by the end of this year. And I have been making it 20 seconds easier for myself by laying out my workout clothes the night before I go for a run in the morning. What this accomplishes is that whenever I wake up, my clothes are already set for what I'm going to first wear that day. They're sitting on top of my dresser. I can grab them, put them on rather than my normal day clothes. And once they're on, my brain is already starting that momentum now of, bodies in motion tend to stay in motion of being like, well, they're already on. So is it that much harder to go put on my shoes? And this is very similar to a topic we've talked about earlier of trying to make things, get that ball rolling, get the momentum going. And it just becomes inevitable at that point that I'm on my run. By laying that out, laying the clothes out, it's like a 20-second investment at night when I've got more energy, I'm feeling a little bit more motivated, I'm not as tired. And so I'm making it 20 seconds easier in the morning for me to just automatically choose the run because that starts to feel like the automatic thing to do. So whatever your goal is, it could be like you want to write more, you want to journal more. So perhaps you put notebooks and pens everywhere. You can buy multiple notebooks and literally just litter your house with notebooks and pens so that anywhere you sit down, anywhere you find yourself, rather than reaching for a phone or turning on the television or whatever other thing you might do instead, now you're presented with a notebook and a pen. And you think, yeah, okay, I could write for a couple of minutes. Why not? And see where that takes you. Perhaps you're like me and you're trying to run, in which case, you could do the workout trick. You could wear you could lay out your shoes right in front of your door. So that is the pair of shoes that's already out and you're going to put those on and go for a run. There are a lot of ways, you can get very creative about this, about how to make things 20 seconds easier. Of course, just as important as making things 20 seconds easier is to make the habit you're trying to break 20 seconds harder. So hiding the remote. If you are trying to stop, scrolling on Instagram all the time, maybe remove Instagram off of your home screen and put it in the app library if you have an iPhone, or remove it off of your iPhone entirely and only access it from your desktop computer. There are a couple of ways to where you can make that a little bit harder. What I have found whenever I put things out of reach, even just a little bit, I can catch myself in those moments as I'm reaching for them, whether physically or digitally reaching for them. And I'm like, oh, right. I made this a little bit harder because I actually don't really want to be doing this right now, and I'd rather be doing something more productive. So this week's song is by one of my favorite bands, the Foo Fighters, and it is the song The Pretender. If you listen to me and Matt on the Super Awesome Mixtape show, you will be very familiar with the Foo Fighters. As I said, they're one of my favorite bands. I absolutely love this song. I find that I'm so motivated when I listen to it. Has one of my favorite kind of elements of a song, which is that it starts a little bit, let's call it quiet, although I don't know how quiet Foo Fighters can be, but then it just becomes explosive in sound at the end. It's very loud, in your face. The music video that goes with it is also really, amps me up because it just shows this scene of literally a wall behind them exploding in color and there's sound and it's so good. So whenever I listen to it, I certainly feel fired up, and it just will hopefully get you, get that activation energy that you need to be able to overcome whatever you're trying to do and set yourself up for a very successful week and hopefully a very successful year. Until next time, stay super awesome because you already are.